Hi, JDL Brushes here, and we have a new video. Now, this time we're going to focus on an interior sketch again. So this video is sponsored, of course, by the Marker Brush Pack. Now, this Marker Brush Pack does include some fine liners and some pencil brushes, and you can see me use them in this video. Now, it's not exactly part of the main ABR file for Photoshop. However, it's just kind of the fine liners and the pencils have their own kind of separate brush file, so they're kind of just supplementary brushes, and they're also kind of experimental in a way because they're not exactly super final, but for me it does work and it just kind of gets the job done. And yeah, so if you did buy the Marker Brush Pack, you can find them in kind of the lower files. So yeah, so I did a kind of rough sketch in the very beginning. Now I think I of course had reference when doing this sketch, and I think for this batch of sketches, for I think the next 3 plus this one being the first one, or the fourth rather, I wanted to try and be more deliberate with my line work, and so I decided to kind of do a kind of pre-sketch with the pencils, so I can kind of plan out my sketch more. And yeah, I just want to see how it looks, the fine liners plus the markers look like when it's kind of planned and not very kind of on the spot impressionistic. So yeah, maybe after this batch I will probably skip the pencils and just go in with the fine liners and kind of try a more fluid, dynamic sketch, something that's more expressive, impressionistic. So yeah, so for the kind of ink work, I did add some shading, some slight shading, and now I didn't add too much because I wanted the marker brushes to kind of do the bulk of it for the shadows and the kind of darker shades of each kind of base color. But yeah, I thought of just trying out some simple shading techniques for the kind of ink pen fine liner stuff, because I did do some research online looking for some kind of professional looking marker sketches, and I found a few, and some of them do have really good ink sketches in the beginning, and then the coloring of the markers, the coloring with the markers just makes it more attractive. So I thought of making a kind of a good enough or presentable base with the inks, and letting the kind of markers later on kind of complement the ink work. Now for this sketch, I was actually kind of again, I was kind of just color picking from the reference photo, the colors, and it ended up looking not as good color wise, because I did use a few adjustment layers. I wasn't satisfied with my color choices because it's so monotonous in a way, or it doesn't have enough variety in color. And maybe in the next sketch, that is something I can kind of be more deliberate on, instead of just fully basing it on the reference photo. Because yeah, so after I do the kind of line work, I do add a kind of some kind of thick darks. They're not necessarily shadows, or although they do reside generally in the kind of shadow part of, say, the wall or furniture, but they're kind of, I call, well, I don't know exactly what to call them, but they're kind of punch marks, where it just, it helps to add contrast to the image, or to the sketch. And yeah, and after that, or after this phase, is when I actually do the shadows. And the shadows are kind of lay on top of this kind of punch marks. And yeah, so these kinds of kind of dark marker marks they kind of hold the entire thing together. They're kind of the base of the image, of the sketch. So yeah. And of course, it's also a stylistic thing. You know, I kind of like seeing some kind of deep darks in the image. And now I'm working on some of the shadows. Now the shadows are on multiply layer, are on a multiply moded layer blending mode. Yeah, multiply blending mode. And I generally like to use my kind of my hand. no shit I mean, because sometimes I try to avoid using the lasso tool too much, because it can become very it can take away the naturalness, the kind of natural feel of the sketch, because I do want it to look like an actual marker sketch, and I want that kind of manual feel. So I try to be wary of overusing the lasso tool for my selections. And yeah, and I do intentionally, let things kind of bleed in the edges sometimes, because it does make it look more natural that way. Now I think I'm going to work on the color part now. It's kind of in the kind of I'm kind of working on the base colors, and this is my problem. I just ended up color picking the entire thing, and most of what I picked were the browns and stuff. So it ended up making my sketch look very boring. Now, if you notice in the sofa, I do like the way it is rendered. Like, there is a good amount of darks, like the deep darks, the colors, and the shadows. They're kind of in the right amount. You know what I mean? And there's this nice fade. So, yeah. And whenever I do these sketches, I try not to fill the entire frame, because, of course, it's more of a style thing. But, yeah. I like it to be very kind of conceptual in some way. So now I'm doing some of the flooring, I think. And all of these colors are in kind of one folder, and that folder is under the is on a kind of multiply blending mode. So yeah. So now I think I'm going for that kind of ceiling bit. And I am using a kind of hard eraser, a simple circle hard edged for the eraser. Instead of using the lasso tool to kind of do the selections, to kind of erase things out, I can just use a hard edged brush. And yeah. And even with that, I try to avoid using that too much, because again, it does make a clean cut. And it can take away from that kind of natural bleeds or marker ink bleeds in the edges especially. So yeah. And I do like that kind of fade out effect with my marker strokes, where we're actually starting to show the kind of canvas or paper behind, and the kind of room or concept is kind of emerging out of the paper, and I kind of like that style or approach. So yeah. And again, you can see it now. It's kind of boring. I should be more choosy or take a little more time designing the color schemes and just make it look a little more interesting instead of just basing it entirely on the photo, right? Yeah. Ooh, and I did have to kind of duplicate the original kind of ink layer because I felt like it was too thin, so I just duplicated the kind of line work, the ink line work. And here I was just testing now for this part I did another phase of the coloring phase, and it's more about adding the kind of darker shades of a specific color. And again, it's under another multiply mode. And yeah, it just adds more kind of a value variety, not necessarily color, because you're kind of picking out the original color. So whenever you kind of paint the new stroke or kind of mark the new stroke, it's just a darker version of the original color picked color. Hopefully I explained that enough. So yeah. Yes. And I believe I even had to duplicate it. Or I remember duplicating another folder in this process. And again, if you focus in on the sofa, it just looks right. Like it's kind of it has a nice fade and everything. So yeah, I want more of that in my sketches. So what's next here? So now I actually do add some color pencils or some pencils, and now in the marker brush pack kind of extra set, in the kind of the pencil brush pack for the marker brush pack, it's technically designed for the initial sketch, the initial rough sketch. So it's the color. Does have a set color, a neutral 50% gray, to kind of give the feeling of a kind of graphite pencil. But yeah, I just used that pencil for my color pencils here, and it's just a way to add more light kind of shading, and it's typically what I see in a lot of kind of marker sketches online, and those done by professionals. So yeah. And I did add them to the kind of light sources as well. They just add an extra layer of fun. And now I'm working on the kind of white line phase. It's kind of a white ink touch to the sketch, and it actually looks kind of cool. It's more. This one is really more about style. I think it makes sense for those kind of spotlights in the ceiling, but for everything else, it's really just more about kind of a style thing. And I'm not sure if I overdid the white lines, but I'm actually not too disappointed with it. And you can see, even if the color scheme is kind of boring, the range of values is enough, or at least it intrigues me enough to be kind of curious about the scene. Although it's not as strong. I mean, the strongest part for me is is actually the sofa, like the way it's just rendered. I don't know. I think there should be whatever that sofa has should be in the entire image or in the entire sketch. So there is that kind of lack of consistency I can see right now in this sketch, but it's fine. I am still trying to kind of figure out a kind of a solid process, and now I'm trying to make this sketch feel more alive by increasing the vibrance and the saturation, and it is helping a little bit. And I tried using the color balance, but I think I eventually hid that adjustment layer, and I focused on a gradient map instead. I was doing a lot of experiments with the gradient maps, trying to find the kind of right, not just the colors, but also the blending modes. Because for the gradient maps, I generally go for the overlay, and the color. It's either of those two, and I also decrease the opacity to about 10 to 20%. So I think this is my first try with but I think I was using the color balance here, and I did eventually hide this layer or this adjustment layer because it just wasn't working for me. And I did add kind of a new layer with using a soft brush and kind of painting in some kind of light glows, and that layer being in an overlay blending mode. And I think it did help, although I could have just done it with a color dodge in the very end, where I would usually just flatten the entire thing. And I think I did duplicate. Oh yeah, I did duplicate the kind of punch darks to make it darker and more punchy. I wanted more of that contrast. Yeah. So now I think I'm working on the kind of second gradient map that I think I will be using eventually, and it actually kind of muddled the colors a bit. I mean, I did like the kind of purples for the shadows and darks, but it kind of took away the kind of vibrancy of the yellows and browns. So yeah. And again, in the very kind of end image, it ended up being kind of two competing colors or two complementary hues. So I mean, it's fine, but it's kind of boring, next time I should add a little more hue variety in my work or in the sketch. And I think once I've flattened the entire thing, I go for the finisher moves, and that's where I use the sponge tool, the color dodge tool, and the burn tool. Now for the sponge tool, I do use the saturation part, and I usually add it in between the darks and the lights. And then from there, I go for the burn tool and just make things darker in some areas. And then my last step is to use the color dodge tool and just add kind of a swooping line in the kind of general area of interest. And that's pretty much how I end my sketches in general. So I think I'm just going to kind of resize the whole thing to make it kind of fit Instagram and stuff. I want to have at least some kind of a little more white space around the sketch. And yeah, so that is the sketch for you. So yeah, bye.